Every day we wear masks, carefully curated versions of ourselves, the person our coworkers see, the person our friends know, our inner self when we log into the internet. We all don these masks, often without a single thought towards the action. Over time, they become so intrinsic to our identity that we often disregard the fact that they exist at all. But what lies beneath? What parts of ourselves are hidden away in the dark corners of the mind? What would happen if those buried fears, desires, regrets, and ambitions suddenly took shape and stood before us? Tonight, we step into the world of dreams, demons, psychology, and one of the most fascinating role-playing games ever created. Myths and legend, history and hysteria, religion and the far reaches of the occult. These and more are the children of a common thing, belief, an intrinsic part of what makes us human. I'm your host, Liam Blackwood, an independent scholar of esoterica and eccentricity, a rational skeptic, father of two, writer, and lover of life. Pull up a chair, fellow lamplighters, and let us cast the shadows back a bit as we examine what lies beneath the light of Occam's lantern. Welcome back to Occam's Lantern. And yes, you may have heard that correctly, Liam Blackwood. We'll get to that in a bit. We've got a great episode lined up tonight, discussing and dissecting one of my favorite video game series of all times, Persona. We'll be talking about everything from the origins to the deep underlying psychology that often gets overshadowed by the modern iteration's funky, colorful jazz pop presentation. Underneath all that glitz and style is surprisingly well-researched and represented Jungian philosophy and more. But first, a bit of news and listener mail. Our last episode on The Adversary was our longest set down yet, weighing in at just under an hour, and yet has rivaled viewer count with our most popular episode and gotten rather high praise as being our best yet. I want to thank everyone again who tuned in and reached out. Support like that really helps me continue this endeavor. On to the name change. I am rather curious about the phenomenon that is synchronicity. Lykos, Greek for wolf, was a name I had been using online for a while now. Since going by Liam, it kind of rolled off the tongue. Well, lately a few things have been standing out. My first real exposure to the name would have had to have been my brother, Joe, owner and operator of Evernight Entertainment. He's used the name Blackwood Hollow before in his haunted attractions. The outro song that I play from Cellar of Rats is named Blackwood's Adventure Sonata. You can find that on Spotify. And recently, I learned that the area I live in was once known as Blackwood, before the current name, that of a railroad tycoon who developed the area. The name kind of sparked with this podcasting endeavor for me, and I've decided to don it creatively. Moving on, now, I imagine this bit of listener input was a product of our visual advertisement for this episode. And I want to preface it by saying I've actually written a full essay on this subject that will be the topic of a later episode, as soon as I'm done refining it and editing it. Getting to the message, I won't include the name because they haven't actually responded to my inquiry to use it, but he writes, rather bluntly I might add, and I'm going to clean up the language and make it a bit easier to understand. Seems like AI. Everything is AI nowadays. Probably even your podcast as a whole. End of message. And as a writer, this really isn't the first time I've been accused of this lately. It's the latest good guy badge, holier than thou, and TLDR. So I thought it of utmost importance to address the six-fingered elephant in the room. Yes, the persona-styled iterations of the Occam's Lantern logo were AI generated. As much as I would have loved to pay an artist and get a masterpiece that I totally would have framed. Again, at this point, this is a zero-budget show, and I wanted something a little fun to make it pop, so... As for the "you made a picture and burned thousands of gallons of water" crowd, well, if you're here in the light of the lantern, I would expect you to have done the research. An image prompt by a single person uses about 20 to 50 milliliters of water. For those less numbers-oriented, that's about a shot or two of booze. You could flick your faucet on and off and use more. Yes, data centers are a major problem, but the problem isn't their mere existence. It's corporate overdrive and massive reliance on the technology that it's a real environmental issue, not us as individuals. And boy, is that a blinder we need to address on a later show, too. The same is true for pollution, recycling, pretty much every environmental issue. But to the next point of aggregation and theft of intellectual property, yes, that's something I agree needs to change. In short, attribution of sources, clear statement of influence, and a citation of permission from the artist needs to be worked into these image generators as soon as possible. As for the "it's all theft" angle, I would argue, and again we'll be covering this in depth in a later episode, that every artist, human or not, cribs, borrows, and uses the data that they have procured through observance and use of other artists' work and technique. Now, as for the accusations of the entire show being AI, clearly my voice isn't, and I've left in a few things like my cat just meowing there and other hiccups and, well, failure to find the right word like that right there. You'll probably accuse that of AI too, but suffice to say that I do a lot of editing, using audible filters, tags I apply, and if you consider those AI, but being that they're processed on my computer and never touch a data center, there's your answer. As for the contents, diatribes, and all speech content, my only use of AI there is to compile sources, examples, and other information for reference. I then use Scrivener to research, write, and revise, and finally edit into a readable form to record for the episode. And that's it. Oh, I did use AI-generated music from Suno for the first few episodes, before I got permission to use the Cellar of Rats music I've been using to this date. And with all that out of the way, let's dig in. I dreamt I was a butterfly. I couldn't tell I was dreaming, but when I woke, I was I, and not a butterfly. Was I dreaming that I was the butterfly, or was the butterfly dreaming that it was me? Yes, the original persona doesn't begin with a prophecy of battle. Instead, it fades in on a simple quotation attributed to the ancient Chinese philosopher Soxi, better known today as Zhuangzi. It's one of the few opening quotes in gaming history that genuinely prepares the player for the philosophical journey ahead. Now, before we can discuss Persona, we need to talk about the series from which it was born. Long before high school students were summoning manifestations of their inner selves, Atlas was producing a very different kind of role-playing game. In 1992, Shin Megami Tensei arrived on the Super Famicom and distinguished itself from nearly every other RPG on the market. While many games of the era drew inspiration from Tolkien, Dungeons & Dragons, and heroic fantasy, Shin Megami Tensei drew from mythology, religion, folklore, demonology, and philosophy. The players did not simply fight monsters, they negotiated with them. Angels could become enemies, demons could become allies, and gods from a dozen of faiths and cultures existed side by side. And the player was often forced to choose between competing ideologies rather than the obvious notions of good and evil. Law, chaos, and neutrality became defining themes of the series, and the games quickly earned a reputation for asking difficult questions, while surrounding those questions with occult imagery and apocalyptic storytelling. I'd like to give a shout out to John Awesome or Johnny Awesome on YouTube for the next bit of information. His video, The Untold Story of the First Persona, enlightened me a bit to the next trivia. Seems like a great channel for pretty deep dive into lore and discussion on not only the Persona series, but a majority of Atlas and other CRPGs. Moving on. The years leading into Persona's development were turbulent ones in Japan. The economic boom of the 1980s had collapsed, leaving uncertainty in its wake. Public fascination with the paranormal, urban legends, psychic phenomenon, and fringe spiritual movements flourished among younger generations. Then, on March of 1995, members of the Aum Shinrikyo cult released sarin gas into the Tokyo subway system. The attack shocked the nation and forced many people to confront uncomfortable questions about belief, identity, and the power that ideas can hold over otherwise ordinary individuals. Against this backdrop, Atlas began to look for a new direction. The developers wanted to retain the mythology and occult themes that had made Shin Megami Tensei unique, but shift the focus away from global catastrophe and towards something more personal. Rather than asking what happens when the world ends, they wanted to ask what happens within the human mind. The result was Revelations Persona, released in Japan in 1996. Instead of soldiers, survivalists, and apocalyptic cults, the story centered on high school students. Instead of demons being merely external threats, many of the game's supernatural elements became reflections of the self. The series would go on to explore these angles. Rumors could reshape reality, urban legends could manifest in the world around you, hidden fears and desires took center stage. Most importantly, the game drew heavily upon the works of Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, whose theories regarding archetypes, the unconscious mind, and the masks we wear would become the foundation upon which the Persona series was built. For many players, Persona appeared to be a role-playing game about summoning demons and fighting monsters. In reality, it was something far stranger. Beneath these spells, myths, and occult symbolism was a story about identity itself, about the people we pretended to be, and the parts of ourselves we hide away, and the difficult journey of becoming whole. To understand the game's deeper themes, we first need to understand the man whose ideas permeate nearly every aspect of the series. Carl Gustav Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist born in 1875. Early in his career, he worked alongside Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis. The two men shared a fascination with the unconscious mind and the hidden forces that influence human behavior. For a time, Freud even viewed Jung as his intellectual successor. Their partnership would not last. Where Freud often focused on repression, instinct, and sexuality, Jung believed the human mind contained something far larger and more mysterious. He became increasingly interested in mythology, folklore, religion, dreams, alchemy, and symbolism. To many of his contemporaries, these seemed like strange subjects for a scientist to pursue. To Jung, they represented clues, something close to our heart here at Occam's Lantern, you'll observe. evidence that human beings across cultures and centuries were telling remarkably similar stories. Why did civilizations separated by oceans create dragons? Why did heroes descend into darkness before emerging transformed? Why did tricksters, wise old men, devils, mothers, kings, and monsters appear again and again throughout stories? Well, if you're here, you've already heard some of this. Jung believed these similarities were not mere coincidence. He proposed the existence of what he called the collective unconscious, a shared psychological foundation inherited by all humanity, not a library of memories, but a collection of recurring patterns and symbols that emerge naturally within the human experience. These patterns, which Jung called archetypes, form the basis of countless myths, religions, legends, and stories. Whether one agrees with Jung's conclusions or not, his influence on modern culture is impossible to overstate. His ideas shaped everything from psychology to film studies and even the creation of video games. But few works wear that influence as openly as Persona. While the demons, gods, and monsters of Persona may appear supernatural on the surface, the questions the series asks are deeply human. Who are we beneath the masks we wear? What part of ourselves do we hide from others? And, more importantly, do we hide from ourselves? Now, we touched upon Jung's most controversial idea of the collective unconscious earlier, and at first thought, most people imagine this psychic hive mind or mystical cloud connecting every human being on Earth, but that's not quite what Jung was describing. We touched upon earlier as well the connection of cultures having similar mythos. To Jung, these similarities suggested that human beings may share common symbolic instincts, not because one culture copied another, but because all human minds are wrestling with many of the same questions. We all experience fear, love. We all struggle with uncertainty and conflict, and search for meaning. Given enough time, humanity repeatedly arrives at similar stories because humanity repeatedly encounters similar problems. Whether Jung was literally correct remains a matter of debate. Modern psychology does not generally accept the collective unconscious as a scientific fact in the way that Jung proposed it, yet even many critics acknowledge the remarkable recurrence of certain symbols and narratives throughout human history. And this is where Shin Megami Tensei becomes fascinating, because the gods, demons, angels, and legendary figures that populate the series are drawn from cultures all across the globe. Norse gods stand alongside Christian angels. Japanese spirits converse with Greek heroes. Hindu deities, Egyptian monsters, Celtic fairies, and Mesopotamian demons all exist within the same universe. On the surface, this appears to be a celebration of mythology, but under that we find a reflection of a profoundly Jungian idea that these figures endure because they represent something deeper than themselves. They are recurring symbols, archetypes, and mirrors through which humanity has attempted to understand itself for thousands of years. And if the collective unconscious provides the foundation, then archetypes are the structures built upon it. If you've ever played a Persona game, you've probably noticed that nearly every major character is associated with a tarot arcana. The Fool, the Magician, the Emperor, the Hermit, Death, the Devil, the World, etc. At first glance, this might seem like an endorsement of fortune-telling or divination, but the series is less interested in predicting the future than it is exploring the human experience. Historically, tarot cards have served many purposes. They began as playing cards before becoming associated with mysticism, divination, and the occult. Whatever one's views on those particular practices may be, the imagery of the tarot has endured for centuries because it speaks in symbols. Each card represents a recurring human experience, a role, or a stage in life's journey. And that is precisely where tarot intersects with Jung. Jung believed that humanity naturally thinks in stories and symbols. We create these heroes, kings, tricksters, etc., because these figures represent patterns. Rather than presenting psychological concepts in an academic language, it presents them through images in the tarot. The Fool, for example, represents beginnings, possibility, and the unknown road ahead. The Hermit represents introspection and wisdom gained throughout solitude. The Emperor embodies structure, authority, and order. Death, a transformation and transition rather than simple mortality. The Devil symbolizes temptation, bondage, and the chains we place upon ourselves. The World represents completion, integration, and the achievement of wholeness. Viewed through this lens, the arcana begins to resemble archetypes, not supernatural forces, but symbolic reflections of recurring human experience. Different names and images, but the same underlying ideas. And this is why the Persona series employs tarot so effectively. The cards provide a symbolic language through which the game can communicate complex psychological ideas. A character associated with the Hermit immediately evokes solitude and reflection. A character tied to the Emperor suggests authority and responsibility. The arcana become a kind of narrative shorthand, connecting individual characters to broader patterns of human experience. Whether one views the tarot as a mystical tool, a psychological framework, or simply an interesting historical artifact, its use within Persona serves a clear purpose. It helps translate Jung's abstract ideas into something visual, recognizable, and deeply human. Now, among all of these symbols, none are more important to Persona than two concepts borrowed directly from Jung himself: the persona and the shadow. Of all of Jung's ideas, none are more central to the series than these two. The word persona originally referred to the masks worn by actors in ancient theater. These masks allowed a performer to take on a role, presenting one face to the audience while concealing the individual beneath. Jung borrowed this term to describe the social self, the version of ourselves that we present to the world. The employee who remains professional even on a difficult day. The parent who remains composed for their children. The friend who laughs at a joke despite carrying private burdens. The confident face we wear in public, or the carefully curated image we present online. These masks are not inherently dishonest. In fact, they are often necessary. Society would be difficult to navigate if every thought and emotion were constantly exposed. The persona allows us to function within communities, maintain relationships, and fulfill the many roles we occupy throughout our lives. The problem arises when we begin to mistake that mask for the person wearing it, because beneath the persona lies something else: the shadow. The shadow contains the parts of ourselves that we reject, suppress, deny, or simply refuse to acknowledge. When most people hear this concept, they assume it refers only to darkness or evil. Jung's view was a bit more complicated than that. Certainly, the shadow may contain anger, envy, greed, fear, resentment, those things we tend to not want to express. But it may also contain strengths we have neglected, desires we've buried, creativity we may have dismissed, or the aspects of ourselves we have deemed socially unacceptable. A timid person may hide their capacity for healthy assertiveness, and a cynic might suppress hope. The shadow is not merely what is evil, it is what is hidden. And hidden things have a tendency to make themselves known time and again. This is where Persona becomes particularly fascinating. Throughout the series, the characters are repeatedly forced to confront versions of themselves that they would rather ignore. Their insecurities, fears, and jealousies, ambitions and contradictions are all dragged into the light and given literal form. The struggle is not simply to defeat these manifestations, but to recognize them as part of oneself. In many stories, growth comes from slaying a monster, but in Jungian psychology, growth often comes from accepting that that monster belongs to you. The idea might be uncomfortable. Most of us would prefer to imagine that our flaws originate elsewhere. Yet, maturity requires acknowledging that every human being contains contradictions. We are capable of kindness and cruelty, courage and fear, selfishness and selflessness, wisdom and foolishness. The goal, according to Jung, was not to destroy the shadow, but to integrate it, to recognize the hidden parts of ourselves without allowing them to dominate us, becoming aware of our flaws without being defined by them. Persona transforms this psychological process into a narrative and gameplay mechanic. Characters literally confront aspects of themselves made manifest, yet beneath the supernatural imagery lies a very human question. What parts of yourself have you buried in the dark? And if they stepped out to the shadows to introduce themselves, would you recognize them? Now, as we begin to close on this section of the show, I would like to return to something rather unique about the second entry of the Persona series, rumors. One of the central mechanics of the game allows rumors to become reality. If enough people believe a story, the world itself begins to change in response. A store may gain new inventory because people believe it does. An urban legend manifests because enough individuals accept it as true. In fact, the major antagonist of the game is a particular dictator that we've mentioned before, coming back from the dead, and yes, that is completely true. His persona was Nyarlathotep, interestingly enough. The certain big monster with a little mustache we mentioned on previous episodes. But less said of that, the better. It was definitely a weird one. Suffice to say, it was a fascinating gameplay mechanic, but also an observation about humanity. Because while rumors may not literally reshape reality in our world, they absolutely shape our perception of it. Money possesses a value because people collectively agree it does. National borders exist because enough people in the right places accept them as meaningful. Corporations, religions, laws, traditions, all social norms derive power from collective belief. Not necessarily false belief, but shared belief. Human beings are uniquely capable of constructing realities that exist primarily within the realm of ideas. This ability has given rise to some of our greatest achievements, but has also given rise to some of our greatest disasters. In short, it's kind of what this entire podcast is about. Throughout history, rumors, fears, myths, and moral panics have spread through societies with remarkable speed. Entire communities have become convinced that witches lurked amongst them. Innocent people have been accused of crimes, and conspiracies have flourished. More recently, social media has accelerated this process beyond anything our ancestors could have imagined. An idea does not need to be true to have consequence. It merely needs to be believed. In many ways, as I've stated before, this is the thread connecting so many of the topics we've explored here on Occam's Lantern. Rituals, monsters, myths, even the adversary changes shape from culture to culture because human beings continually reinterpret old ideas through new lenses. Persona merely asks us to consider what happens when those ideas become visible. The answer, according to Jung, is that we learn something about ourselves, not because the symbols are magical, but because they have always been one of humanity's oldest languages. Whether we encounter them in dreams, myths, religions, video games, or folklore in general, they remain mirrors reflecting pieces of who we are. And perhaps that's why Persona has endured for so many years. Beneath the demons, dungeons, and supernatural battles lies a deceptively simple question. Who are you when the mask comes off? And that is the end of the writing, so that means it is time for us to undo that top button, pour ourselves a drink, and enter the decompression chamber. Alright, so if you couldn't tell, this game has had a rather unique mark on me and my interests as they developed. It was one of the first games I'd ever played for the original PlayStation. I think it was this, Beyond the Beyond, and Battle Arena Toshinden, maybe? And it was the prime example of any localized JRPG game in that it had some rather weird westernization in it, including changing the entire race of a central character and the protagonist's hair color from black to red. Definitely a strange one. Entire quests being removed from the Western release, even. But one intriguing bit is the entire character of Philemon, who is kind of the teacher, the calm, thoughtful, wise entity who introduces you as a character to the concept of persona. This character is pulled entirely from the Red Book and a description of one of Jung's meditations. And that's something that not a lot of people think the character was created for the game, but I mean, visually, yes, but it was a representation of that character from Jung's writings. And then there is, of course, the Velvet Room, which is a manifestation of your inner psyche as a location, a room that only the main character can see. And a neat thing is that game to game, it kind of changes its appearance. In one game, you're on the inside of like a stretch limousine that is the Blue Room. On one that's more focused on like criminal activity, it takes the form of a prison cell. So it's, again, just a magnificent representation of the inner self and ideas that Jung championed. And there is this, another neat change from game to game is the cultural shifting of it. Because in the original Persona, everything was a lot kind of broodier and dark. And yes, there were very slapstick moments of the game, but overall it was almost this ethereal, ghostly, haunting game to play. And in Persona 2, you get a little bit more stylization, a little bit more fun. But then in Persona 3, it jumps into this feel that we get to Persona games, from Persona games to this day, that pop, punk, funky, jazz, super stylized beat. And I think that too is a reflection of the Japanese pop culture that it came from. You know, you see those kind of changes and shifts in what's popular. And they did just announce Persona 6 being made. And it's kind of interesting. I'm a little curious where they're going with it. It looks a little bit moodier. I swear that they showed the Philemon Stone, and Philemon as a character hasn't really been directly influenced as much as I can remember in the last 3 Persona games. That's 3, 4, and 5. So if they return to that kind of thing, I would be very happy to see it, as much as I love the groovy, catchy tunes that they use nowadays. It definitely needs, I think, a little bit of a facelift. We've gone through the poppy, happy, let's solve an adventure JRPG formula a little bit much, but again, That's kind of the niche that the series has kind of fallen into lately, so I'm accepting of that. As much as I don't really get into other JRPGs just because of the, it's just not my jam, the whole hands on hips. Let's solve an adventure and the power of friendship overcomes. Yes, the Persona series does that, but it wasn't always the case in the beginning, so, I'd like to see it kind of cycle around and try something new, but if it doesn't, I'll fully understand. So what else can we cover? The whole rumor engine from Persona 2. Enough people start saying something and suddenly it becomes true, literally. It's interesting because when Persona 2 came out, of course, we had the internet, we had message boards, we had that kind of collective connection, but social media hadn't quite taken off, and especially in the form it takes nowadays, where it almost functions like that, where the most outrageous claims gain traction and foothold, and suddenly, for all intents and purposes, sometimes even up to the level of government, it is accepted as truth. And it's interesting because the idea of personas, of the identities we wear, especially on the internet, it didn't occur to me until right now that this was the episode I decided to take on a new moniker, a new name. So if Jung were alive today, what would he think of, avatars, VTubers, online personas? It seems like such an intrinsically rooted subject in his philosophy. So, we've spent a lot of time tonight discussing masks, shadows, dreams, and symbols. So, next time you look into a mirror, consider which parts of yourself are being reflected back and which are still standing just out of sight. So, I said at the end of last episode that I was going to be taking a break. And as you're getting episode 7, not even a week after I made that announcement, it occurs to me that while I do have a list of episodes that I want to do, notes and research that I've been taking, it seems like I'm not able to turn myself off mentally if I know what the next episode is, because I start to laser focus on it. So this time I'm not going to say what our next episode is. I don't know what our next episode is. We've got several things that are nearing completion that it could be, but I need to clock out for a bit and, if anything, focus on marketing. I'm looking to make some short 10-20 second clips to upload to TikTok and YouTube Reels, things like that, to help promote the channel and really get it out there, because as we have been growing week to week, episode to episode, I definitely want it to go faster. I want to get this out. I would love to get more feedback, more reviews, more listener mail. So you do your part and I'll do mine. I do have a finalized card design that I will be posting and hopefully be getting some printed off soon to leave around areas locally. So if you've come across these episodes by one of those, well, thanks past me, I guess. Until then, keep the fire stoked and the lanterns full. This has been Liam Blackwood, and you've been listening to Occam's Lantern.